I was cleaning out the garage on a Sunday afternoon when I found the metal box. It was shoved behind a row of old paint cans, pushed so far back against the wall that I never would have noticed it if I hadn't been moving everything out to lay down new flooring. The box was small, the kind you might use to store important documents or a little cash. It had a combination lock on it. I had never seen it before in my life. I stood there in my garage holding it, turning it over in my hands, thinking maybe it belonged to my son-in-law or one of the grandkids. But it was heavy, and something shifted inside it when I tilted it. I set it on my workbench and stared at it for a long moment. Then I thought about Eleanor. My wife had passed 18 months earlier. Cardiac arrest, the doctor said. She had been 59 years old, healthy as far as any of us knew, and then one morning I woke up and she was cold beside me. I had spent the better part of a year and a half trying to put myself back together. I had sold her car, donated most of her clothes, done all the things the grief counselor told me would help. I had not touched the garage, because the garage had been her space as much as mine. She kept her garden tools out there, her holiday decorations, boxes of old photographs she always meant to organize someday. I tried the most obvious combinations first. Our anniversary, her birthday, my birthday, nothing worked. Then I tried the year we got married and heard the click. Inside was a prepaid cell phone, the cheap kind you buy at a convenience store. Beside it was a folded piece of paper and a small envelope. The phone was dead. Naturally, I carried everything into the kitchen, plugged the phone into an old charger I kept in the junk drawer, and sat down at the kitchen table to unfold the paper. It was a list of numbers, account numbers, I realized, and next to each one was a dollar amount. The numbers were large. Some of them were very large. My hands were not steady when I picked up the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It was Eleanor, but she looked different from any photo I had kept of her. She was sitting at a restaurant table, and she was laughing. Not her polite laugh, not her camera smile. She was laughing the way she used to laugh when she was young, her whole face open and unguarded. And sitting across from her, leaning toward her with his hand over hers on the table, was my brother Dennis. I sat at that kitchen table for a very long time. Dennis was 3 years younger than me. He had always been the one our mother called the charmer, the one who could talk his way into anything and out of everything. Growing up, I had admired him. As adults, I had loved him the way you love someone you've slowly learned not to fully trust. He had borrowed money from Eleanor and me more times than I could count. He always paid it back eventually, always with some story about a deal that had almost gone through, an opportunity that had almost materialized. He was good at almosts. He had never been married. He said he was too restless for it. He had been at Eleanor's funeral. He had hugged me and cried and said she was the finest woman he had ever known. I waited for the phone to charge enough to turn on. When it finally powered up, I sat there and watched message after message load onto the screen. They went back 2 years. Some of them were from a contact saved only as D. Some of them were from Eleanor to D. I read them all. And by the time I finished, the sun had gone down and I was sitting in a dark kitchen and I had not moved to turn on a light. The messages told me a story I did not want to know. Eleanor and Dennis had been meeting for at least 2 years before she died. The early messages were careful, coded, the kind of thing people write when they're still pretending to themselves that nothing serious is happening. But by the second year, they had stopped pretending. Eleanor wrote things to my brother that she had not said to me in a long time. And Dennis wrote back in the way of a man who had found something he was not willing to let go. But there was something else in those messages, something that cut through the pain of the affair and turned it into something colder. In the last 3 months before Eleanor died, her tone had changed. She wrote things like, "I don't feel right, and I've been so tired, and I don't know what's wrong with me. I've been to the doctor twice, and they can't find anything." And Dennis had written back, "You're probably just stressed. Don't make it into something." And once, near the end, "You need to stop worrying. I'm taking care of everything." I read that line 4 times. I'm taking care of everything. I called my daughter Claire that night. She drove over within the hour, and I showed her the box and the phone and the photograph without saying a word. I watched her read the messages. I watched the color leave her face. "Dad," she said. She didn't say anything else for a long time. We talked until midnight. Claire wanted to call the police immediately. I told her I needed to think. I needed to understand what I actually had before I walked into a police station with it. Because what I feared I had, was not just proof that my wife had been unfaithful. It was something much worse than that. And if I was wrong, if I was reading grief and paranoia into a set of messages that were painful but not criminal, I would be destroying my brother for nothing. I went to the doctor's office the next morning, Eleanor's doctor, a woman she had seen for 15 years. I sat across from her and told her what I had found, and I asked her directly whether Eleanor's death could have been caused by something that was not natural cardiac arrest. The doctor was quiet for a moment. Then she told me that Eleanor had come in 3 times in her final 2 months complaining of fatigue, heart palpitations, and nausea. Her tests had come back within normal range, which was why the death had been ruled natural. But she said, carefully, that certain substances would not show up in a standard toxicology screen. She said if I had concerns, she would support a request to the medical examiner for a more comprehensive analysis. I filed that request the same afternoon. While I waited, I did something I am not proud of. I started watching my brother. Dennis lived 40 minutes away, in a lake house he had bought 5 years earlier with money he claimed came from a real estate investment. I drove out there on a Wednesday morning and parked down the road. I told myself I just needed to see, to think. What I saw was a woman coming out of the front door at 9 in the morning, getting into a car I did not recognize, and driving away. She was probably in her late 40s, well-dressed, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from feeling completely at home somewhere. I did not approach the house. That evening I called a private investigator, a man Claire had found through a colleague at her law firm. His name was Wallace. He was retired law enforcement, matter of fact, the kind of man who does not seem surprised by anything. I gave him the phone, the photograph, and the list of account numbers. I told him what the doctor had said. He listened without interrupting, and then he told me what he would need to do his job. 2 weeks passed. During those 2 weeks, Dennis called me 3 times. Normal calls, the kind we had always had, asking how I was getting on, whether I needed anything, whether I had thought about coming out to the lake house for a weekend. I answered normally. I said I was fine. I said maybe sometime soon. I hung up each time and stood in my kitchen feeling like the floor had turned to water underneath me. Wallace came back with what he had found, and he sat at my kitchen table with a folder and walked me through it piece by piece. The woman I had seen leaving the lake house was named Sandra. She and Dennis had been together for at least 3 years. Sandra, it turned out, was a bookkeeper. She was a very good bookkeeper, according to Wallace, because the financial structure Dennis had built was intricate. Over the course of 5 years, Dennis had opened accounts in both his name and a shell company that he controlled. Some of the account numbers on Eleanor's list matched accounts that Wallace had found linked to Dennis. The amounts on Eleanor's list totaled just over $400,000. I had not known that money was missing from us. Eleanor had handled our finances. She had been better at it than I was, and I had trusted her completely. What the account numbers seemed to show was that Eleanor had been moving money, small amounts at a time, amounts that would not trigger automatic flags, into accounts that Dennis controlled. Whether she had done this willingly, under pressure, or without fully understanding what she was enabling, I could not yet say. But then Wallace told me the last part. And after that, it didn't matter much what Eleanor had understood or not understood. The medical examiner had completed the additional analysis. Eleanor had died with elevated levels of digitalis glycoside in her system. Digitalis is derived from the foxglove plant. In low doses, carefully managed, it is used to treat heart conditions. In the doses Eleanor had apparently been receiving, administered gradually over a period of weeks, it would cause fatigue, nausea, heart palpitations, and eventually cardiac arrest. It would mimic natural heart failure almost perfectly, and it would not show up in a standard autopsy unless someone was specifically looking for it. Someone had been poisoning my wife. I sat with that fact in my body, the way you sit with something that has fundamentally changed the shape of the world. Eleanor had not been a willing participant in her own death. She had been tired. She had not felt right. She had gone to the doctor twice, and they had not found anything. And all the while my brother, the charmer, the one our mother loved best, had been sitting across from her at restaurant tables with his hand over hers, writing back, "Don't worry, I'm taking care of everything." I understood it then. the full shape of it. Eleanor had found out about the money. Maybe she had confronted him. Maybe she had threatened to tell me or go to the police. And Dennis had decided that Eleanor knowing too much was a problem he needed to solve permanently. Maybe he had even loved her, in whatever way a man like Dennis loves anyone. But the money had always come first with my brother. It always had. Wallace told me we needed to go to the police. I told him I agreed. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Hargrove. She was thorough and she was direct, and she did not treat me like a grieving old man who had gotten confused about something. She took the phone, the photograph, the account list, Wallace's findings, and the medical examiner's report, and she spent the next 10 days building a case quietly while I went home and tried to act as though nothing had changed. Dennis called me once more during those 10 days. He said he had been thinking about me, that he knew the anniversary of Eleanor's passing was coming up, that he wanted to take me to dinner somewhere nice. I told him that sounded good. I told him I would call him later in the week to set something up. I listened to him tell me he loved me, little brother style, easy and warm, and I said it back because I did not know what else to say and because Detective Hargrove had asked me not to confront him directly. I kept that promise for 9 of those 10 days. On the 10th day, I drove to the lake house. I don't have a clean explanation for why I did it. I had been sleeping badly and not eating well, and I think the combination of grief and rage and something that felt very much like guilt for the things I had not seen, for the trust I had placed in the wrong people, had pushed me past the point where I could sit still any longer. I told myself I would just drive past. I would just look. His truck was in the driveway. I pulled in. Dennis opened the door before I knocked. He looked at my face and something shifted in his expression, something quick and practiced, a recalibration. He smiled and stepped back and said I was a sight for sore eyes and asked if I wanted coffee. I walked past him into the living room and turned around and told him what I knew. I told him about the metal box. I told him about the phone and the messages and the photograph. I told him about the medical examiner's report and the digitalis and the accounts and what Wallace had found. I stood in the middle of his lake house living room and I watched his face while I said all of it, and I watched him decide, in real time, which version of the story he was going to try to sell me. He went with denial first, then anger, then something that looked almost like grief, like he was the one who had lost something. He said Eleanor had come to him, that the money had been her idea, that she had been unhappy for years and had wanted a way out and he had been trying to help her. He said he didn't know anything about any toxicology report. He said I was out of my mind, that grief had gotten into me and was making me see things that weren't there. I let him talk. I had already called Detective Hargrove from my car before I walked to the door. She arrived with 2 other officers 12 minutes later. I heard the cars in the driveway and I watched Dennis hear them too, watched him look at me. And in that last moment before the knock at the door, the charm was completely gone. What was underneath it was not what I expected. It was not rage or defiance. It was just blankness, the flat, effectless look of a man calculating odds and finding they had finally run out. Detective Hargrove arrested my brother on charges of first-degree murder, financial fraud, and conspiracy. Sandra was arrested the same afternoon at her apartment on charges related to the financial fraud. She had known about the accounts. What she had known about Eleanor's death came out later in the investigation, and it was enough to add additional charges. The trial lasted 9 days. I sat in that courtroom every one of those days. Claire sat beside me for most of them. I watched the prosecutor lay out the evidence piece by piece, the same way Wallace had laid it out at my kitchen table, except now it was in front of a jury and a judge, and it had the weight of everything the state had added to it. Phone records, financial records, witness testimony from 2 people who had seen Dennis purchase foxglove extract online under a name that was not his own. The medical examiner, patient and precise, explaining to the jury exactly what digitalis does to a human heart and exactly how long it takes. Dennis sat at the defense table through all of it looking like a man who had decided his only job now was to not fall apart in public. His attorney argued reasonable doubt with everything she had. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty, first degree. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Sandra received 12 years for her role in the financial crimes, and for the testimony she eventually gave about what she had known and when. The money was recovered almost entirely. It went through a lengthy legal process, and some of it was lost to attorney fees and court costs. but the majority of it came back. It goes into a trust now, managed by Claire, for my grandchildren's education. I stood outside the courthouse the afternoon the sentencing came down, and I thought about Eleanor. Not the Eleanor of the messages on that phone, not the Eleanor who had been meeting my brother at restaurants and laughing with her whole face open in a way she hadn't laughed with me in years. I thought about the Eleanor who had come to the doctor twice in her final 2 months saying something was wrong, who had been told everything looked fine, who had been going home to a life that was collapsing around her, in ways she may not have entirely understood, while the man she had trusted was measuring out a slow death for her. She had made choices I will never fully understand. She had trusted someone who did not deserve it, but she had not deserved what happened to her, and the fact that the truth was complicated did not change that. I walked back to my car and I drove home, and I sat in the kitchen for a while in the quiet. The garage has new flooring now. I finished it the month after the trial. There is nothing stored back against the walls anymore. I keep the lights on in there, and I keep the door between the garage and the house unlocked, because I have decided that I am done with things being hidden in the dark corners of my own home. People ask me sometimes how I missed it, how I didn't see what was happening. I tell them the truth, which is that you see what you are given to see. You trust the people who have earned your trust, and sometimes that trust is the very thing they count on. Dennis had been counting on it for years. Eleanor had been inside it when she made her choices, and she had been inside it still when she paid for them. The lesson I keep coming back to, the one I turn over in my mind on the mornings when it still sits heavy, is that the people closest to us carry the most of who we are. They carry our blind spots. They know the exact shape of our trust. And some of them, not most, but some, learn to use that shape like a key. I think about that metal box, the fact that it sat in my garage for 18 months after Eleanor died, the fact that I only found it because I finally decided to put down new flooring. I think about all the ways I could have never found it, all the ways Dennis might have gotten away with everything if I had just left the old flooring alone. I am not a man who believes things happen for a reason in any simple sense, but I believe in paying attention. I believe in the small decisions that seem unimportant right up until the moment they are the only thing that matters. I fixed the floor. I found the box. I made the calls I should have made 18 months earlier if I had known to make them. I don't know if that's grace or luck or something else entirely. Maybe it doesn't have a name. Maybe it just is what it is. A man in his late 60s, cleaning out his garage on a Sunday afternoon, finding the thing he didn't know he was looking for. And this time, choosing not to look away.